Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Level Up Legacy. Today, we wanted to talk about why we love JRPG so much. You guys know, if you've watched our different channels, that we're big JRPG fans, and there's so much to unpack here. We wanted to dedicate a whole episode to it. But before we dive in, what's up, Slam? How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I mean, it's been an interesting week for sure, right? But I won't get into all the nuances of the things that have been going on and the personal life. But I'll tell you what, I have been playing a lot of games, Brandon, a ton.
What you got?
Okay, so as of last week, I was really close to finishing E's memoir.
Yep.
Right after we finished the podcast, I stayed up until maybe 2 or 3 a.m. and finished the game. That last boss was pretty tough, but I finished
That's
it.
insane.
Great game. Loved it. Yeah. Play E's memoir. It's a ton of fun,
Okay, but I have to ask, how are you still physically able to stay up till 2 a.m. without dying for the rest of the week? How is that possible?
I don't sleep a lot.
Okay.
It's true.
So you're just always dying.
It'll hit me one of these days where I need more sleep, but typically 6 hours, I'm good. Okay. And we record this typically on like Friday night, so get to kind of sleep in the next day.
Fair.
So E's memoir knocked that out, right? Started Monster Hunter Wilds. Excuse me. Dived deep into that and had a ton of fun with it. Still playing it. I haven't made it through like that main campaign yet, so the game really hasn't even started for me. But I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with Monster Hunter Wilds. And then I got the 3DS. So, of course, I had to start a game on the 3DS, right?
Which was?
Majora's Mask.
Of course.
One of my favorite Zelda games. Had to boot that one up. It's like muscle memory going through that game right now. And I try to remember back to when the very first time I played that game and how difficult it was for me as a kid. Now I boot it up and I know everything I need to do, everywhere I need to go, and the order in which I want to hit everything. The game is still amazing. Still love replaying that game all the time. It's really special one.
Yeah.
I also got to preview Claire Obscure Expedition 33. I really loved that. Yes, I did.
Bro, I shouted you out on I do this like weekly call at work, and fortunately for my the community I work in, or the space I work in, there are a bunch of nerds like me, so I get to talk about games every now and again. And I shouted you guys out. I was like, if anybody here is interested, Claire Obscure got some YouTube buddies that covered it this week, so go check it out. So
thanks, man.
Trying to help you.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wish I would have been able to get the preview out when everybody else did. It took me a little bit longer, but I got to spend, I think the demo ended up being like roughly 3 to 4 hours. I played through it, maybe 1.5, almost completed it a second time. I really love this game. So I was already really hyped about it. It's always like previews and all the trailers and stuff leading up to this had my interest, but actually playing it and getting my hands on it, totally different story. It really does take a ton of the elements of our favorite JRPGs, which we'll talk about today, and puts them into this game that is just so different, right?
Yeah.
And I think the unique thing about Expedition 33 is that it appeals to JRPG fans for the actual core game mechanics, but it appeals to a lot of these people that might not be JRPG fans. Kind of has the look and feel of a lot of the kind of Sony first party, realistic type games, you know what I mean?
They're getting a lot out of this game, like for being like a budget title.
Yeah, AA or whatever.
How are you guys pulling this off? Like, this looks incredible.
Yeah, the voice acting, the art style, the presentation, the soundtrack is so good. The score and sound design really good. Animations are top notch. This is going to be an incredible game. If the rest of the game is anything like the 4 hours I played, this is going to be incredible.
Yeah. The
And
voice
yeah,
cast alone was just like when they announced the voice cast, it was like,
yeah,
what? Like,
wild,
okay.
so wild. Um, and then lastly, I'm starting up Suikoden. I I've spoken on it
Attaboy.
before on this podcast. It's been a large hole in my JRPG history. It's been a game that I've really, really wanted to play over the years. It really is all the things I look for in a game. And I've always wanted to play it, just hadn't got around to it. Now it's perfect time for me to do so. So jumping into
Oh
that one
man.
now that it's come out. And yeah, been a
I
long
I I
week.
got it. I got it because I'm like, with how freaking expensive these games have been, the only other accessible way to play them for so long was like on the Vita or like the PS3. Um, so the fact that they have it on cartridge or disc if you get the PS5 version is just wild to me. So I'm like, yeah, of course I got to get this. But I just played it like mm, 4 years ago now, which doesn't feel like it was that long ago. And so there's that part of me that's like, oh, there's so many other things to play. Like I just played these games. Do I want to do them again? I really enjoyed it. I loved playing them. I played them on the Vita. Um, and it was like the second or third time I've gone through them, but I went through them in succession, like the remaster has you do, remake or whatever this thing is. Um, and it was really cool. And I still have Suikoden 3. I have it physical on the PS2, but I have it digitally on the PS3 as well. Suikoden 4 as well. 5 did not get released digitally. I do have it physically though. But 5, I've mentioned 5 is the one I started with, and I loved 5. And it's actually really interesting playing 5 because there's all these connections between all 5 of them that are pretty cool. So enjoy your time, man. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good stuff.
Do
It's
you
like
think they'll
classic RPGs.
do you think they'll like bring back or remake the others if these are successful? I feel like there's been a lot of hype around
I hope
the
so.
1 and 2
I really hope
remasters.
so.
You know, sometimes a
Yeah,
remaster will come out and it'll slide right under the radar and it'll get a
right.
couple of, highlights or people that are highlight or hyping it up for like a minute. But I feel like everyone is super excited to play Suikoden right now. And
Yeah,
it's
Suikoden and Lunar, like those two are such like legendary series of games that they have just been gone for so long that it is like this is like golden. Like not just, oh, this was like some cool niche game that we're now getting. Like Batten Kaitos, I loved those games.
those were
But
definitely
like
niche.
to be fair, yeah, they're pretty niche and like not a lot of people knew what they were or played them. But like Suikoden 2 in particular and like Lunar, that's unbelievable that we're actually getting those back. And I hope, here's my hope. Um the original Suikoden 1, 2, even 3 to get to go into 4, going to 5. When you beat them, the save had an impact on the next one. And there were like little goodies and little connections that they made. Um, and with like the switch to Switch 2, for example, if they came out with Suikoden 3 and could connect it because it's like on the similar generation, right? I'm not sure how the Switch to Switch 2 is going to
Yeah.
work out, but presumably they would be able to make that work.
If they can do it
Um,
like the DS, 3DS type thing, we're
Yeah, yeah.
golden.
So
Yeah.
if they wanted to do that, like that would be fantastic. I really hope they do. Like having Suikoden 1 through, I keep saying it differently each time, but 1 through 5 on the Switch family of systems would be incredible. And then if they wanted to do a 6, that would be great. Um I'm not sure. I haven't played, like I tinkered with 3. I haven't played 4. From people that have played the whole series, I've heard that those two are they tend to be like weaker. 4 in particular seems to be the weakest of the 5. Um, I don't know how people generally feel about 5, but again, maybe it's just because my entry point. But I loved 5. Like 5 was mind blowing to me at the time. Um, so I yeah. Anyway, all of that to say, I really hope they bring it all back, and
Yeah.
I think there's a chance. We'll see.
Yeah. I can't wait to fully get immersed in these for sure. It'll be now that I've, finished Eve's memoir, I've got finished my preview. Monster Hunter Wilds is going to be like a forever game that I'm probably just going to play in the background between my other stuff. I could really focus on Suikoden, and I'm looking forward to diving into it.
Yeah. Someone sent me an Instagram reel about a dual blade character in Monster Hunter Wilds, and they were like attacking, this monster and like riding up its back with the blades, and I was like, okay. I
It's
mentioned last week with
that
Taylor
it was
here
too
that
slow,
I
and I
like
was
that.
about to
Yeah.
get into the dual blades conversation. I was like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to make this a
Yeah.
Monster Hunter podcast, but yeah, if you
it
really want to get into Monster Hunter, hit me up. We'll talk.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe one day we'll see. There's still so much that I want to get through, especially going back to some of these older franchises. But man, it's been a week for you, huh?
Yeah, lots of video game stuff. Gotta love
Yeah,
it.
that's exciting. It's been less of a week. Okay, it's been a week for me as well, but not on the video game side. Like I've been able to play a little bit of Pokemon Crystal, um, a little bit of Xenogears. I'm going through Xenogears right now, trying to finish that up. I'm hoping to get a good chunk of time in this weekend to push that forward because Xenoblade Chronicles X is coming out, and I really want to dive into that. Um, but this week was just a lot of other stuff happening, so every time I had a chance to sit down and do something, I was focusing on editing my next YouTube video, which should be coming out hopefully within the next couple of days. Um, and I'll spend some time this weekend getting back to some things. Trying to balance all that can be interesting because I do like Sleep Slam, unlike
Yeah,
some people around
sleep
here.
is good. Yeah, I like some people. Why sleep when you can do stuff? No, I'm just kidding.
That's
You
a
need
fair
it.
point.
Anybody who's
Yeah.
listening, go sleep after you finish the podcast.
Yeah, Slam's experiences, not advice, general advice for the public. You should
Yeah,
definitely get some sleep.
sleep equals good. So
Yep. Yep. Sweet. Well, should we dive in?
let's do
Wanted
it.
to talk about why we are so connected to and love the JRPG genre in general. I was thinking about this as we were discussing the topic, and it was interesting because I was thinking through my gaming history in general, like where I started. I started when I was growing up. I didn't have the original NES, but my babysitter had it, and we would go over there frequently. And I really got into basically just Mario. I played a bunch of other games too, but like Mario, Duck Hunt. Interestingly, I tried Zelda. I don't know what age I was. I was probably like, I don't know, 5 or something. I tried Zelda and I was like, I don't get it. And I turned it off. And they had like the gold cartridge and everything. Looking back now, I'm just like, what were you thinking, little Brandon? But Mario was kind of like my major entry point, like many others. And then when the Super Nintendo came out, that was when I played some of that at my babysitter's as well, especially Lion King. Did you ever play Lion
Yep.
King? That game was
And
freaking hard.
Aladdin and
Yeah. Yeah.
Batman. I played all
Yep.
those. Yeah.
Yeah. I just read, as a side note, I just read this um, article recently that the reason Lion King was so hard was because they basically designed it so that you couldn't just rent it from Blockbuster and beat it in a weekend. You either needed to buy it or you needed to keep renting it to beat the game. And I'm like, man,
Those games
there's
were
so many
hard.
like, yeah, there's so many like design principles that you don't even realize are connected to the marketplace at the time, which I
Yeah.
find interesting. But anyway, my parents got us a Super Nintendo, and they started us off with Mario Kart and Yoshi's Island. And Yoshi's
Solid
Island
choices.
was, yeah, fantastic. I loved that game. We also had Aladdin. So a lot of platformers. That's kind of where I started. Um, Moving forward a little bit, I was eventually introduced to Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. I didn't play a lot of the other Super Nintendo games because I didn't know what they were. I was the kind of kid that would like walk into a store and be like, "Oh, Godzilla's on a box. Let's get Super Godzilla." Or, "Oh, there's a cool spaceship," and it was like F-Zero. Um, but I eventually got Zelda, and then went back when I found Funko Land, or GameStop, as it came to be known later. I think GameStop bought them or something, but um, and discovered after enjoying Ocarina of Time A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, and I had both my 64 and my Super Nintendo set up, so I played A Link to the Past. And those games like really changed things for me, and I think paved the way to the JRPG genre. In addition to Pokemon, which was playing in parallel, which is an RPG, but if someone's like, "Hey, you like JRPGs?" Like you don't typically think of Pokemon, because it was just sort of such a broad audience game. And I think those really paved the way for me in just this idea of like the big adventure, like in A Link to the Past, going into houses, finding, places you can bomb, finding treasure chests, like the exploration piece was something you would see in JRPGs later on. And so I feel like those had such an impact on me, so that when I was introduced to JRPGs, which started with Final Fantasy VIII, it just all kind of clicked for me. I'm like, the exploration, the characters, the big world, and then you added layers onto it with the music and with the storytelling that was much more in depth than your typical Zelda game or your typical um, Mario game or whatever. Although Majora's Mask, that's a good one. That's a good one there. It's very interesting. But I think that's kind of my starting point for what got me into JRPGs and why I think it led me there. And I can expand on that later. But how about you? Where did you start with all of this?
Sure. So actually, very similar to you. So I didn't have an NES. My grandparents did, and it had come out long before I had started playing games because I was very young at this point. And they had Super Mario Brothers, and they had a baseball game and like a soccer game. And I didn't really get into the sports games much. I did play the soccer game, and like the soundtrack to that, I think is still embedded into my brain to this day. Like if I heard it, I'd probably start like making the noises with my mouth. But I played Super Mario Brothers like 100 times over. Got to the point where I
Yep.
could beat that thing so quick as a
Yep.
kid. And that was basically the only game I played. It essentially taught me to play video games.
Yep.
Then I moved on to the Super Nintendo. My dad got one, and played a lot of platformers as well, Lion King, Aladdin, Batman, like all of the games that came from movies. And then even some that came from TV shows like The Tick or whatever. I remember getting
It's
that
like
for
Ren
whatever
and
reason.
Stimpy.
Ren and
Yeah.
Stimpy, Beavis and
Yeah.
Butthead, whatever. Um, I then started getting into Super Mario World and A Link to the Past, and I played a lot of Link to the Past. Again, I'm still very young at this point, so I wasn't really finishing it. I was just roaming around, exploring, and doing random
Sure.
stuff. And I really loved it. And this is when I kind of started to discover what I liked out of video games. And there was this, I don't even know how to describe it, but with A Link to the Past, there was almost this cool factor, right?
Yeah.
That I discovered with Zelda. And I'm a diehard Zelda fan to this day because of that cool factor.
Oh, wait, you can't tell.
But it was something that Zelda kind of introduced to me, which was there's a lot going on outside of what you're experiencing in the moment-to-moment gameplay. And there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of things that you need to roam around and discover. And it doesn't just tell you what to do, where to go, how to discover these things. You have to explore and figure that out on your own. And I went from playing Mario and mastering Mario and, getting used to, that being how games played, to go into Zelda and being like, this is something completely different and something that I really, really love. I then went to Nintendo 64 and played a ton of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and it became this thing where, you know, I was becoming obsessed with these games that had so much stuff going on outside of what you were trying to experience just while you were playing it. And so much stuff to discover, and there was lore, and there was like story elements to it, with Zelda, Ganondorf, and everything else. So um, that was when I kind of started. My uncle came along and he was like, "Oh, you like Zelda? Let me show you something." And that's when I started getting into things like, Legend of Dragoon, Final Fantasy, like the PS1 JRPGs,
Yeah.
right? And that's when, my obsession with JRPGs just started taking off, right? And yeah, that's how it all started for me, basically, from Mario to Zelda to the JRPGs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting because on Super Nintendo, I remember so I had this friend, he might actually be watching this. Shout outs to Danny if Danny's watching this. Good friend of mine in like I think it was like 4th or 5th grade. And he had a PlayStation and he had a Super Nintendo, and we would always play the Super Nintendo together. And we really loved playing, Zelda. We loved playing Kirby Superstar Saga was one that I absolutely loved, like those little mini compact stories in that game. But he had, I think it was Final Fantasy 7 or 8, and at the time it had just come out, which is wild to me when you think about how quickly they were getting those games out back in the day. Um,
Yeah.
and I remember watching him play for a little bit. I think I have this distinct memory of him summoning Shiva. I'm pretty sure it was Final Fantasy 8, and I was just like, what is happening right now? Like this is not the Super Nintendo. I don't get it. And I kind of just like moved on. Um, and stuck with, enjoying the Super Nintendo. The 64 didn't really have any RPG type thing. Like
No.
I didn't know what Quest 64 was, and frankly, even if I did, I've heard mixed things about that game. Let us know in the comments if Quest 64 is worth checking out, and Slam will go play it. Not me though. Um, so that was like my first introduction to that. And then obviously again, like Pokemon, I was obsessed with Pokemon. Um so that was all there, the leveling up and the grinding and stuff. I just didn't know that was something that you can get in other games. I thought it was just like Pokemon is Pokemon, that's it. And then I met a friend of mine, Elora, who may or may not be on this podcast sometime in the future. Um, and she was the first one that introduced me to Final Fantasy VIII. I think I've mentioned this story before. Legend of Dragoon, which I didn't play until a while later. And I think I've mentioned here, like I made fun of her initially, like, oh, Final Fantasy, like you and your fantasy games, ha ha ha. And then she basically shut me up and handed me the controller and was like, just play. And I started it, and that for me was like, oh my gosh, like the this is incredible. Like this isn't anything like any other game that I've played. The story was so interesting, the characters were so interesting. Um, the just the world, traveling around the world map, the leveling up, the music. Like I think I've mentioned before, I was that kid in school that, like, listening to music for me was listening to video game soundtracks. And that's largely because of Final Fantasy. But it just opened up the world for me and made me realize that the games that I enjoy most have these components that make it. I don't know. I've always thought of JRPGs as like one of the best genres for demonstrating art in video games, because there are all of these components that they really hone in on. It's not just a game. It's like a fighting game. It's like the fighting game mechanics are the core thing, shtick, right? Um, but in JRPGs, you have the gameplay mechanics, but you have the characters, you have the story, you have the world, you have lore that goes along with the story, but oftentimes can be discovered separately. You have these like relationships with the characters. You have the music that it just totally enhances everything. Um, and it just created this experience for me that it was just like they're outside of like Zelda, which I continued to enjoy and still to this day absolutely love. There were few games that really got me that excited to be like, what is this package? Like, what's gonna be in here? And that's for me. That's really the components about JRPGs that got me into it, and then I just kept getting new games. I was like obsessed with Square Enix for a while, where because I had enough experience with Final Fantasy and then I tried a couple of other games, it was basically like if Square Enix's stamp is on there, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna love it. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm just gonna get the game. Um, and I missed a few of them, but like when we got into the PS2 era, there was just so many. PS2 is when I was introduced to Dragon Quest, at least formally. I think I played one of the Game Boy ones from a friend of mine when I was younger. But Dragon Quest, Star Ocean, Valkyrie Profile. Um, what else? Radiata Stories was another one that I absolutely loved. And they were all so unique and different, but they still had those core components of your music and your story and your characters. And it always just felt like an adventure. And it just made it so that it was so hard for me to want to play anything else. And to this day, my play time is like 95% JRPGs. There are other games that are great, but that's that's where it is for me.
Yeah, same. I think it's funny. Sometimes I'll play a non JRPG game and wish it had JRPG elements in it. I'll be like, oh, this would be cool if, this was there. I am too. I'd say about 95% JRPGs. I play a little bit of everything. I do shake it up every once in a while and get into some other stuff. I mentioned Tevi was one of the games that I picked up on my New York trip.
Yeah.
That was a classic, like I didn't really know what the game was, walked into the store, saw the case, was like, this looks cool. And it has like bullet hell elements, and I don't know what it is about those type of games. I very much like them. Returnal,
Sure.
Resogun. I remember the PS4 came out and all I played was Resogun. That first maybe month of the PS4, it was just a Resogun machine for me.
Oh man.
It's basically all I played. But yeah, to your point,
Doesn't Nier have some bullet hell
it
things as
does.
well?
Yeah, Nier has a lot of stuff like that as well. I like it when they add that in. I don't know what it is about it,
Yeah.
but
Makes it interesting.
it hooks me in. Shake up to the moment to moment gameplay, I suppose. But for me, yeah, once I got the taste of like JRPGs and saw that there was a lot more to these games. Story. I've always been someone that's been really interested in the stories of whether it be like a TV show, games, movies, whatever. This stuff is really important to me. I know most people watch something or play something for a variety of different reasons. Story and writing and characters, lore, world building, stuff like that. Super, super important to me. And I don't think
Yeah.
any genre does it better than JRPGs. And growing up, I was a big anime fan still into this day. And a lot of that translated well into
Yeah.
JRPGs in terms of some of the writing and the characters and some of the stories that were told. And it felt very familiar, and it was easy for me to connect with these.
Yeah.
And
Even the art style, right? It's like the
yeah,
Tales series is basically like an anime in
yeah,
a game
and a
form, right?
game.
Yep.
Yeah. And a lot of them do that today, the Persona games,
Yep.
for example, the cutscenes are, are really, really well done, anime wise. So I want to say that it just was like such a natural transition, from, the Marios and, Mario Karts and stuff like that to, when it was time for me to get to something a little bit more advanced to make that genre to connect with JRPGs in general. I think
Yeah.
I want to say the first couple. It's hard for me to say this is the first JRPG that I ever played and became obsessed with, because I felt like there was a few that I got into all at once, and That was mainly because of my uncle, like I said before. And I know not everybody has like this one individual that kind of ushers them into, a genre or whatever, but he was that for me,
Yeah.
where I had someone that was recommending these games to me and also telling me you should play this and then this, and if you like this you could play this. And I think that helped a lot with me really enjoying JRPGs and kind of growing into the genre, because I didn't have to do the trial and error of jumping into a game that was just too advanced or too hard for me, or jumping into a bad game and not liking it. I was
Right.
introduced progressively in the proper way by someone who was a JRPG veteran at that point.
Yeah.
And they were there on the phone to answer questions. It's like my, you know, call a friend hotline basically for JRPGs
Right.
as I was
Yep.
trying to figure everything out. And yeah, it really made it just so easy for me to just become completely obsessed with these games. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's where it was for me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned that. I think that was mostly true for me as well. I had a few friends, so I mentioned Elora. Had a couple of other friends, Steele and Renee as well, that were super into it. And Steele in particular, he was this guy I was friends with in high school, and he had just a massive collection of RPGs because his dad was a gamer, and so he just got them. He got them a whole bunch of stuff, and so most of the time, what would happen is, you know, I'd be like, "Hey, there's this game that I'm interested in," and he's like, "Oh, if you like that game, I'm also playing this one and this one and this one," and so he really got me into like the Final Fantasy games I got into before, but we played a lot of them together. So like the Game Boy Advance remakes of like 1, 2, 4, 5, we played those around the same time. I remember this one this one particular time. It was so funny. I begun to get this reputation for being incredibly lucky, because I don't know if you remember this at all with Final Fantasy IV, but there was this pink adamantite that you could get to make the best. I think it was the best armor,
Yeah.
and it was like you had to find this pink whatever they're called, flan or something, and it had like a 0 point whatever 4% chance of dropping. And we were sitting there one time grinding. We were both in the same spot. We were looking for the same thing. And I got two of them in like 30 minutes or something like that. And he hadn't gotten one yet. He was just like, "What's going on?" Anyway, so we would sit there and we would do that. He introduced me to Star Ocean. So Star Ocean 3, which was like mind boggling to me. I borrowed Legend of Dragoon from him, and that was the one where I don't know if it was a PS2 Slim issue or something, but for some reason I couldn't get past the end of the second disc. Um, he introduced me to Radiata Stories. He introduced me to Drakengard, which was my first major like action RPG. Uh, but I love Drakengard. He introduced me to Suikoden 5 or Suikoden, however you say that. So a lot of those different um, just big names in the RPG sphere were introduced by him. Elora before that introduced me to, like I said, Final Fantasy. Legend of Dragoon I was introduced to first with her, but I played from Steel. She introduced me to Fire Emblem, and I was absolutely obsessed with that game. We've talked about Fire Emblem
Yep.
before, but I probably played through that game like, I don't know, 8 times or something like that, because when I first got it, just the supports and everything, I just kept wanting to go back and play it again and again and again and again. Um, Lunar, I didn't even know. So this is so funny. I only found this out recently. Lunar Legend was actually the first one that I played, and if you look online, everybody is like, Lunar Legend is trash. It's the
What?
worst. It's like the worst because it's like a almost like a demake of the first Lunar. I didn't know that. I had never played the other ones. I was just like, there's a Lunar game on the Game Boy. I'm going to play it. And I loved that game. And the only reason I didn't beat that game is because it glitched on me at the end. I was playing it. There's like the sword you get to like go fight the last boss, and I had the sword before it, and for some reason on the save file, it duplicated my normal sword, and I didn't have like the end game sword to use. And so I just literally could not beat the last boss because you needed it. Um, so that was trash. But other than that, I loved that game. And yeah, had no idea that like Lunar Silver Star Story on, or sorry, Silver Star, whatever the PSP one is. Um, I didn't know that that was like a remake either. I thought these were all different games, and I'm like, why are they all so familiar? I feel like I've done this before. Um, because I'm dumb. And later on, I realized that these were all just like remasters or whatever. But
So let me ask you this real quick. So, we talked a little bit about Zelda kind of
yeah.
ushering in everything uh into enjoying JRPGs, right? Did you ever go through a period in your life where you didn't play that many JRPGs, where you kind of like took a hiatus from the genre? Because um there was a little period of that for me. It wasn't long, but I'd be interested if there was a period like that for you, and if so, what games filled that void for you?
That's an interesting question. I would say the closest thing for that for me was probably college. Um, when I started as a freshman, I had the 360, and I got into Infinite Undiscovery and Lost Odyssey, and those were amazing. I loved those. But during that time, I wasn't like buying a lot of games because I was a poor college student. Um, and so most of my time in that era was spent playing like Halo 3 was a big one. Rock Band and Guitar Hero. I loved those games. So kind of like these party games, we would have it where in order to play, across the hallway from me was one of my eventual roommates and very good friend Alex, and his roommates, and we had our 360s like connected via, I think it was Ethernet or whatever cable we used. And we just told people down the hall like, don't trip on this. And then we would play multiplayer that way, and we had an absolute blast with that. So a lot of the more social games filled it for me. I was still playing some RPGs at the time though, but they were super niche. Like there's
Right.
probably some games that people haven't heard of, like Valkyrie Profile, Covenant of the Plume on the
Yeah.
DS. Um, things like that that were like on the DS or in handheld. I would still do some RPGs. Even Pokemon though, like after Gen
Yeah.
4,
Pokemon
I
was
was like,
a staying game in my library, in my rotation. Yeah.
but for me after Gen 4, like I didn't get Gen 5 right when it came out because I was like Gen 4 was like fine, but I personally, and maybe this is going to be, the controversial hot take on this particular podcast, but
Uh-oh.
I thought, and I still think the pacing is like not that great. It's probably the weakest Pokemon game in terms of pacing, especially like just some of those chunks where it's like you beat a gym and you're trying to get to the next gym, but there's like three different areas you have to go through, and it just feels like a slog. It doesn't feel like anything exciting is happening. Um, so I beat him, and like Platinum was, I liked Platinum. There is no Pokemon game that I don't like. I just was kind of tired of it, and had to be convinced to buy Black, or it was White. Sorry, it was White. Um, and then once I got that, I was like, oh, Gen 5 is great. I love Gen
Yeah,
5.
it is.
But
So,
there was a pause there for me then.
yeah, I had a bit of a pause too. I think so. The games that I played during that period were still some RPGs, right? Fallout. I became obsessed
Okay.
with Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. Um, Mass Effect. I
Ooh, yeah.
played a ton of Mass Effect 2. I think,
That's cheating though. Those are
yeah,
RPGs.
they are RPGs. But non RPGs, I'll go Metal Gear Solid.
Mm.
These
That's a series I have not played.
you really should. Three, the remake of three is coming out. Three might be my favorite in the series. I know a lot of people love
Okay.
two, but Snake Eater is great. I think those games are really intricate, well designed, you know, thought provoking games that, stick with you long after you're done with them.
It's like RPG adjacent from a story standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Kojima, so um you get if you know anything about his games, uh
Yeah.
they're complicated. But anyway, played a lot of Metal Gear Solid, but yeah, like you, I still is playing some JRPGs every once in a while. Lost Odyssey was one of them. I played Blue Dragon on the 360 as well.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that
Yeah.
one. Still played basically all the Pokemon games as they came out. And then every once in a while, I would uh, play a DS or you know whatever handheld JRPG. Then the Vita came out, and after a while, I just became that. I think that's kind of when, and I'd be interested to know kind of what got you really back into the whole thing. And for me, it was the Vita. I loved the Vita. I got it on launch day. I'm a big handheld guy. I loved the PSP. So when the Vita was announced, I was like, I got to get my hands on this thing. And I loved that little console. And it was a JRPG powerhouse. There were so many great JRPGs on that console. And that reeled me back in. It was Persona 4 Golden. It was it was the first time I played Persona 4. And I was back. You know what I mean? I was like,
Yeah.
why all I'll play forever is JRPGs after this. So yeah, that was it for me. And I played through that game obsessively. It was the only game I played, put probably like 100 something hours into it, just completely obsessed with it. And then I was just looking for the next JRPG, the next one, the next one, the next one after that. And you know,
Yeah. Yeah, I had a roommate that was super into some of the other RPGs that you had mentioned, like Mass Effect and like Elder Scrolls. But I never really got into those until Skyrim. And that became like a roommate extravaganza. Like all of us had a file, all of us were going crazy on that. My one of my roommates, Mike, had a character named Jimmy Dean, which was like this joke because Jimmy Dean were like these breakfast sandwiches that you could buy.
sausages.
Yeah. And Jimmy Dean in Oblivion had so much strength that he was like, "Hey guys, check this out. Watch this." We had this other roommate that was like, "Oh, the best way to play this is a mage. Like, it's just the best build. You're gonna get the most powerful or whatever." And Mike like booted it up and was like, "Let me show you Jimmy Dean." And he just put everything into strength. And Jimmy Dean literally like punched a bear across the screen, which was the funniest thing we had ever seen. Um, so that was some good times as well, but I never got into it until Skyrim. And I think what brought me back, it's an interesting question. What brought me back to JRPGs? Um, Honestly, I think it was like it was tinkering with emulation a little bit. One of my roommates was, or he was like roommate adjacent. His name's Tom, and he was like across the way. He was an old roommate's roommate, and so we were all kind of in the same group in the dorm. He knew how to do all of the things that I didn't know how to do. So he got my PSP set up so that I could emulate on it. And got me connected with some of these older games. I tried like Fire Emblem 6 with an English translation pack for the first time. And those kind of like were going on in the background. And the DS is really what kept me going. I had a Vita and I totally missed the JRPG factory that thing was until years later. Um, Even Persona, I was it's probably like let's call it 8 years ago or so. I think I mentioned this. There was a guy in a GameStop who was like, "You have to play this game if you have a Vita," and I was like, I don't know." And he's like, "No, bro, seriously, you
He's
have to
talking
play
about
this."
Persona.
But yeah,
Yeah.
and that was the first time I touched it. Like the Vita, I had it for a while. I had like Uncharted, because I was into the Uncharted series. Um, but it was the PS3 era that was just kind of,
It was weird for JRPGs. We
yeah.
got
Like
Nino
I enjoyed
Kuni, which
13.
you talked about on the
Yeah,
last
but like I
podcast. Yeah.
missed Nino Kuni when it was on the
Yeah.
PS3.
I didn't.
Um,
I actually played it on the PS3. It
okay.
was one of those games, Studio Ghibli fan, and I saw it and was just like, hey, I have to play that.
I honestly, I'm trying to get back to answering your question because I'm not sure, but I think in a weird twist of events, I think it was actually the Wii that like really brought me back
There's some
because
sneaky good ones there.
well, there was this one time I remember it was we just moved into a house right outside of college, like a bunch of the same roommates that I've discussed. We were in there, and there was just this one weekend where I was just like, there's got to be some good JRPGs on the Wii. Like I want to play a JRPG that's new that I haven't played. I have a Wii. There's got to be something. I looked it up and I found that there was this little game called Xenoblade and there was this little game called The Last Story. And I was like, well, those look Final Fantasy-ish. Like that looks interesting. So I looked up like the local GameStop at the time, and they had copies of both of them, and they were having this deal at the time where if you come in and sell your games, they'll like double up. So I had a stack of games I was not playing, and in a terrible mistake of selling games to GameStop, I went down there and I sold all these games to GameStop, but they doubled up for me, and I was basically able to walk out of there with both of the games. Uh, for I think I paid like $5, um, and they weren't anywhere else that I could find. It was just at this particular GameStop that had them, and I popped in Xenoblade and I was blown away. I was like,
Changed your
"What
life,
the
man.
heck?" Yeah, yeah. I was just like, "This is crazy." And then I popped in The Last Story, and it was kind of the same thing where I'm like, "This is weird," because the battle system in The Last Story is very like Wii focused. Like that game was built for the Wii. I really hope they remaster it at some point, but if they do, they're gonna have to like tinker with that battle system. Um, but I loved it. I was just like, this is it. Like these are JRPGs. Like this is no longer a Wii Sports console because that's kind of what the Wii became, right?
A
There
lot
was
for
like
a lot of people too. Yeah.
yeah, there was like a few good games here and there that are like actual like real games, but a lot of it was just the, Guitar Hero, Wii Sports, like fun kind of gimmicky family kinds of things, which were fun. And Zelda. Like I basically got the Wii for Twilight Princess.
And Mario
Um
Galaxy. That's a good one too.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to I'm not pooping on the Wii here. Like it was great, but it just wasn't the JRPG machine or anything like that. That kind of generation in general was odd because the Xbox was, maybe this was just my perception, but I think the 360 was like the most JRPG forward console. It felt like with Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon, and there was like several others, Infinite Undiscovery, The Last Remnant. There was just a bunch of them that made it feel
Yeah.
like if I was going to get a JRPG, it's going to be on the 360, which was
It's
weird.
interesting to think about that. Let's think about that for a second because I Final Fantasy 13. This was back when Final Fantasies were kind of exclusive to PlayStation, right? They didn't really come to
Yep.
Xbox yet. Correct me
Although
if I'm
13
wrong.
did come to Xbox.
Was it launch or did it come way later? That's what I'm trying to remember.
No, it came later. It came
Okay,
later.
right. So
I remember there being some big hoopla about that. Like, oh, 13 on the Xbox 360.
yeah, I think it did come later. So you had Lost Odyssey, you had Blue Dragon, The Last Remnant, a couple other things here and there. PlayStation, we got Nino Kuni, Final Fantasy 13. Trying to think some other big ones that came around that time, but
There was like White Knight Chronicles, which I
Yeah,
did play, but were not like I wouldn't
not
consider
great.
those stellar. Yeah.
I wasn't a huge fan of those
Um,
games.
there's some PS3 things or RPGs that I didn't know about at all that I'm getting back to. Like Folklore was one. Um, yeah, there's a few others. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
But yeah, it's that period of
It
time
was pretty
was,
sparse.
yeah, that period of time was interesting for sure. And that was kind of the period where, I got into Persona 4 on the Vita. I think the Persona 5 came out on the PS3 first, s- tail end of the console.
Yes.
Did it,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it came out
Or
on
no, it was a
PS3,
PS4.
PS4 when it launched, and then cross launch. I think it did it come to the PS3. I don't know. We're getting on a tangent about when games came out and what came out for some older consoles. The fact of the
Right.
matter is, the Wii had some sneaky good JRPGs on it. It was the console that kind of like sparked that with you. And I haven't played the
Yeah.
last story. It's one that I really want to get to. So, like you said, hopefully they do remaster it. But I mean, Xenoblade, hell of a game right there, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I remember at the time like going back and playing some older games, probably because I wanted to play JRPGs and they just weren't showing up as frequently as I wanted. Um Radiata Stories, for example, really I like obsessed with Radiata Stories well after the PS3 came out. I had tinkered with it before, but I remember there was one. Um, they called it interterm. It was like basically your January time off, and I had a TV in my room at my parents' house. Like I came home for that period, and I hooked up my PS2 and I played Radiata Stories, and I just absolutely like almost like ADHD obsessed with that game. Um, I got so into it, and that was again during the PS3 era. On the DS, there was your Dragon Quest games, so I played Dragon Quest 5. Yeah, 5. The Heavenly Bride one. That's 5, yeah. Yeah. I played 5 for the first time and I got super into that. I played a bunch of other like DS remasters of older JRPGs. That's when like Soul Silver and Heart Gold came out. I got super into that because it's Pokemon. Pokemon pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I said I took a pause with Gen 4, except for Heart Gold and Soul Silver because I loved Gold, Silver, and Crystal. And that was always a fun thing to play with other friends as well. But yeah, it was kind of a weird time. It was
Yeah,
kind of a weird time
there was
where it
that.
wasn't
Now
there
we're in
wasn't a
a day
ton
and
of
age
JRPGs.
where we're completely
Yeah,
bombarded with
yeah,
JRPG releases. You could play only JRPGs now, which I
yeah.
almost exclusively do, and still have too much to play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, most definitely.
I mean
Most
this
definitely.
this month alone is wild, right?
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that a little bit for a second. I know we're coming close on time, but I want to talk about some games today, some like modern JRPGs that are really pushing the genre forward and helping it appeal to a more wider mainstream audience. Because for the past few
Mhm.
years, I've noticed that there's a JRPG in the nominees for Game of the Year a lot of the time, right? And a lot of people that I'm friends with that never were interested in JRPGs, didn't really even touch them when they were younger, didn't touch them when they were older, played almost exclusively like Halo and Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto and things like that, are now asking me, I know you play JRPGs. What are we doing? What do I play? Do I jump straight into this? Right. And looking for people like us to do what my uncle did for me and usher them
Yeah.
into the genre. And I think that there are some games that are really kind of pushing the genre forward, innovating on it. Metaphor, Refantasio comes to mind. Did a
Yep.
lot of really, really cool things with that game. Persona 5 and Royal did
I
some,
think Persona 5 is a big one.
yeah,
Yeah.
really, really just pushed not just Persona into the mainstream, but JRPGs in general. I feel like that was, kind of toward, uh, I think it came out in like 2016 or 2017, and was right around that time. JRPGs weren't super popular yet. We weren't getting bombarded with JRPG releases, and they weren't this huge mainstream thing. But almost everyone I talk to knows what Persona 5 is at this point, even if they don't play
Which is
JRPGs.
pretty wild if you think about it, because Persona was pretty niche,
It was,
and
yeah,
now it's pretty well known, even from those who are not RPG fans, which I find really interesting.
yeah. So those are some Atlas games, but I do think, um, for MMO fans, there's Final Fantasy 14 that ended up becoming one of the most popular and well-regarded MMOs in existence, and still to this
Because
day
it's
has
incredible.
yes,
I
it
don't care
is,
what anybody says.
has a huge following over in the MMO
Yep.
space. Dragon Quest 11 popularized Dragon Quest. There's no question. Dragon
Yep.
Quest 11 was so many people's first Dragon Quest game.
Yeah.
It
Well, I
was a
think
huge one.
I feel like there is a lot of the switch effect here. I don't know if you've heard this term before, but this idea of like games coming out on the Switch just kind of like blowing them up.
Yeah,
And because Dragon Quest 11 came out
on the
on the
PS4.
PS4
Yeah.
well before the Switch version, but I feel like it's the Switch version that everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, this
Yeah.
is it right here."
And the reviews for the
Yeah.
PS4 version weren't super positive, if I remember correctly. From
Oh,
major
really?
outlets. I remember it getting like heavily criticized for like random stuff. And then now looking back on some of those reviews, people are like, "You're raw. You were raw. Well, this game is amazing." It was a
Oh, that's
little
interesting.
mixed. It wasn't so widely known as this is one of the best JRPGs ever made until Dragon Quest XI S came out on the Switch with its refinements, and there were some quality of life fixes, and they added the 2D mode, which is really cool, by the way.
Yeah, that's super cool.
I love it. For classic guys like us, it's just so cool to play that game
Yeah.
in the 2D. It's so cool to see how they
Yeah,
did that.
for sure.
And now everybody regards it as one of the best JRPGs ever made, and I would agree. I liked it on the PS4. I picked it up on the PS4 like when it came out. I remember grabbing it, and I will say I liked the PS4 graphics like better than the 11S, which is the only way you can play this game now. Like if you buy it on PC or anywhere else, it's just the 11S version, so you can't go get that the original PS4 version with the different graphical style, which I find a little odd, but I remember liking
That
it
is
quite a bit.
odd.
I
I wonder
remember,
if it's worth more because of its rarity now. That's interesting.
yeah, if there is a
Gonna go look
way,
it up on eBay.
yeah, I know. I was just thinking of that as I was talking about it. If there is a way to play that version or buy that version that I don't know about, someone let me know in the comments, because I remember picking that up for PS4 before S came out and being like, man, graphics are so good. And then playing S, and obviously on the Switch it doesn't look as good, but like, now they only have the S version on. I picked it up on PC on sale once because I just wanted to see what it looked like on PC, and I was like, no, this is still the Switch version. Like, it still kind of looks like, obviously higher resolution, but it still looks like the Switch version. So yeah, I'd be interested to know more information on that.
It's so interesting. I waited for Dragon Quest 11 came out, and I'm like, I'm interested, but I know it's gonna come to the Switch. I don't know why, because when it came out, there was no indication, but I'm like, I'm gonna wait because I feel like it's coming. And sure enough, it did. And as soon as it came out, I was like, all right, let me check out the demo. And I've told that story, but got super into that. But to your earlier question, I really do think like the Switch plus COVID made a lot of these franchises completely blow up. So at least they have become more household names. Like Persona, Persona blew up on its own. That wasn't a Switch thing. But Fire Emblem,
Yeah,
Fire Emblem
Fire
Three
Emblem
Houses,
definitely. I think Three
Yeah,
Houses became much more
completely blew.
mainstream.
Yeah,
I
from a
mean,
sales
Awakening
standpoint.
helped with that. Awakening was a big one, but I think Three Houses
Yeah,
really pushed that
yeah.
much harder.
I'm just saying from a like a sales and just a general, cultural conscious standpoint. Like Awakening was great, it did well, but the 3DS didn't do what the Switch did
Nah,
in terms
not
of,
at all.
people's participation in
Yeah,
gaming. Um yeah, so Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest, um trying to think of some other big ones. Like there's other big franchises like Animal Crossing became a whole thing, but that's
yeah,
not a JRPG. Um yeah, those are probably some of the bigger ones that have made an impact. And obviously, we've talked about you know great places to start, and then some of our favorites through a number of different episodes. So if you're listening to this and you're interested, go check out our other episodes.
definitely.
There's a
They.
ton of stuff that we've talked about in this realm.
I think it was a good
Um,
time for us to talk about this topic because if this topic spurred a bunch of questions in your mind about what you should be playing, we have plenty of episodes that are going to help you with that, and
yep.
they'll basically kind of let you know what these different games are all about. But I do think you're right. The Switch helped really usher in that mainstream JRPG situation that we're in now, where
Yep.
and we could even say Ryza with the Atelier series. I
Yeah.
never played those games until Ryza. Didn't play a single one. In fact, I never even heard of it
Yeah.
until
That's my
Ryza.
point, right?
Yeah,
Like now
on the
now it's kind of
Switch.
like a
Yeah,
regular discussion, right?
yeah,
But before that, it was super super niche.
yep.
Yeah, and I feel like games like Claire Obscure. Um, I don't know if we'll see that on the Switch too. But those are games that are coming out that I feel like have potential to have a
To draw
larger
in more
impact.
people. Yeah,
Yeah, just because of how unique it is and how I guess kind of surprising that one is in terms of like, hey, this is a basically an indie studio or a smaller studio. This isn't even a full priced game. It's going to be less expensive, but it looks incredible. Like it looks better than most things that are coming out. So that one. I'm really excited about that one. That's got a lot of potential. Um, but I don't know. I think some of these remasters and remakes are gonna continue to help. Like I didn't want to go down the remaster remake rabbit hole, but we're getting a lot of them, and they are opening up opportunities for people to play some of these older franchises that they've probably never heard of. Like I've heard of Suikoden or Suikoden. We've heard of Super Mario RPG. We've heard of Star Ocean. 1 and 2. We've heard of Lunar, but like a lot of people will not have played these games.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think the Switch has definitely made an impact there, and will continue to do so as these games continue to come out. So
yeah,
I'm excited to see what the future holds.
yeah. It's a better time than ever to be a JRPG fan. And if you're
Oh
looking to
yeah,
get into the genre, there's so much coming out now and so much to play in terms of remasters, remakes, backlog. There's limitless experiences
truly.
to be had. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on like the Nintendo Switch Online service or
Yeah.
the games that you can buy on the PlayStation Store. Like there's like Rogue Galaxy. I loved that game. I want to revisit that one. You can get it on the PS5.
Yep.
You can get Rogue Galaxy on the PS5. Like there's a bunch of games like that. Jeanne d'Arc. Games like games like that are just available. So there is a plethora of JRPGs that you can dive into for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
That was a fun conversation. Thanks,
Loved
Slam.
it.
Where can everybody find you?
On YouTube at Slam Zany. I'm also on Twitter. Check me out.
I've always wondered where the name Slam Zany came from, but maybe another time.
Maybe another time.
And for me, you can find me at Retro Brandon. Got a video coming out here on Dragon Quest 3. Finally, been working on that one for a while, and a lot more content to come. If you like retro games with a major dose of RPGs and nostalgia, then go check me out. That's my shtick. All right.
It's a good one.
Otherwise, yeah, thanks, man. Otherwise, we will see y'all next week. Hope you have a good weekend, and yeah, have a good one.
Catch you on the
See ya.
next one.